Hello, and thank you for joining us today. This is Tom Kurtz. I am with our Global Solution Management team for Intelligent Asset Management at SAP. I'm joined today by my colleague Sam Conway from Forrester. He'll have a chance to introduce himself with a bit more detail in a few moments. But before we begin with our anticipated content, I just wanted to take a couple minutes for some housekeeping items, make sure everybody's set up to enjoy and receive our content for today. So if you're logged into the tool, you can notice that all the engagement tools in front of you are resizable and movable, so feel free to explore that a bit. Make sure you're getting the best experience you can. There is also a Q&A engagement tool, so please, throughout the webcast, if you have questions that you'd like to drop to either Sam or myself, please feel free to do so. We will try to answer those as we go, but know that the answers are given directly to the asker, and so we will also be trying to address those at the end of the session so that we have a chance for everybody to benefit from those questions and answers as well. There will be a copy of today's slide deck that will be available in the resource list later. And if there is a challenge, sometimes we have noticed that there could be some network connectivity issues, or you may find that the slides are advancing more slowly. If you find that you get to where your slides are behind where the speaker is, please, you can push F5 on your keyboard to refresh the page. And an on-demand version of this will be available afterwards as well. So that should bring us to the end of the housekeeping items, and that means we can move on to our content for today. Quick look at our agenda. There's really two main components to this. I wanted to provide a few minutes up front of the strategy overview for what SAP is doing right now with Intelligent Asset Management. That's our portfolio that really takes what we've done with EAM, Enterprise Asset Management, over the years and extending that into the world of APM, or Asset Performance Management. So I want to set that up for a few minutes to make sure everybody has that context in mind. And really the rest of the presentation then, or the rest of our session today, I want to hand it over to Sam to go into more detail on the total economic impact study that has recently been done for a couple of the solution extensions here, what that is, a high-level summary of that, including financial details, and finally our Q&A at the end. So with that, let's begin. I mentioned a minute ago the importance of the context of the IAM, or Intelligent Asset Management strategy, that SAP is undergoing right now and has been going through for some time. And the catalyst for that, the genesis of that, really is folks listening on this call. It's you, it's your colleagues, it's companies out there who are working with SAP and are seeing a continuous evolution in their market and in their business process. So really the customers of SAP that we've been working with in the world of maintenance and planning and so forth, and execution and resource scheduling, that world continues to shift and evolve. And this slide here, I always like to talk about this slide as really the left side and the right side. So if I focus on the left side for a moment, that shows the picture of today and how that picture is starting and has been shifting more. And what I mean by that is, historically, the world of maintenance has been more traditionally reactive. You look at fixing assets after failure, maybe some on condition, where you start to realize through preventative schedules things that you can do. But we're seeing more and more companies wanting to do more than that. They want to not just execute or manage the maintenance of their assets, but they want to manage the entire life cycle of those assets. And so they want to get to a more proactive state where they can do failure prediction more readily, where they can look at more prescriptive recommendations and optimize their assets and the life of their assets as a result of that. So in order to do that, that's when we start to move to the right side. So if we start to say, okay, we want to be able to do this, then what does that mean from a strategies and methodologies perspective? So the left side of this picture with the gold items, the asset strategies there around being predictive or simulation, looking at calendar-based, looking at on-condition, run-to-failure, and so forth. These are either things that some people may be listening to saying, I do those today, or you might be looking at those saying, I've heard about those, or I'm thinking about doing those. I need to understand more about those. So those are the asset strategies that companies are either doing or starting to look at. And there are certain methodologies out there in terms of reliability-centered maintenance, in terms of looking at the risk and criticality and analyzing that of potential failures, looking at failure modes and effects, so the FMEA analysis, looking at preventive maintenance reviews. How do we create these recommendations and not only look at them, but feed them into our maintenance ERP processes? So really the merger of these worlds of how do I take my asset strategies, but how do I blend them with important asset methodologies and maintenance methodologies? So that is the why, if you will. So we want to be able to do this. We see business value in doing this. We see efficiencies and productivity gains by doing this. And because customers are saying this more and more to SAP and have been saying this more to SAP, that's had an impact on how we manage our roadmap, how we drive our intelligent asset management portfolio. And this graphic here, feel free to study this very intently, because this is something you see SAP talking a lot about. And I love telling the story in this simple graphic, because it really takes the world that I think most asset practitioners understand today, and then it continues to evolve that and bring those asset strategies and methodologies together we just saw on the previous slide. So the bottom, we talk about this overall SAP Intelligent Asset Management. It's the world of, at the bottom here, asset operations and maintenance. So that EAM world that folks have probably dealt with for many years, the world of maintenance planning and resource scheduling, the world of maintenance execution and the analytics and reporting, being able to extend those business processes into that world that we mentioned of asset performance management. Well, in order to do that, what are some of the capabilities that we need to look at effectively? And those capabilities are things like asset networks and collaboration. So the ability for these different stakeholders, whether you're an OEM, whether you're an operator, whether you're a service provider, and so forth, being able to share information effectively about that asset. If I'm an OEM and I sell an asset to an operator, that operator owns has installed it and owns and operates it now, we both have a reason to understand information about that asset. Another area of capabilities is asset strategy and performance. So this is really getting into that concept of risk and criticality analysis. So not every asset is the same. They may fail on a different frequency. The severity of that failure may be different. The cost of replacement or spare parts inventory may be different. Not all assets are created equal. And so I thus want to manage my maintenance plans accordingly. But in order to do that, I have to set those plans up front. I have to understand my assets, what my total inventory of assets are, and how I want to treat them differently, and how that potentially translates to recommendations that I can feed into my maintenance planning. And finally, asset health prediction optimization on the right side. I may want to use IoT data. I may want to leverage all these sensors that if I'm an operator, that my OEMs have, or if I am an OEM, I may have value-added services I can add to my operators. Again, all stakeholders may have an agenda to be able to better serve their market and manage their cost. And finally, in the middle here, we see this all coming together from a data perspective. So there's something called Asset Central Foundation that is a central data repository that can manage data across these cloud applications, but then also can interface with my S4HANA or ECC, my ERP systems, where I do my planning and my EAM processes. So then if I take a closer look at that piece, Asset Central, and this brings us really to my handoff to Sam in terms of the total economic impact study that was done. SAP recognizes to realize a portfolio like this and to realize the gains that the customers are asking for on the first slide, it takes a data management, a content management. It's going to take an ecosystem of players, not just SAP, to be able to realize this value. And so that brings us to a couple of our solution extensions that we're not going to go in depth on in this call, but it is related to the study that Sam's going to walk us through. So those two extensions, on the upper right, we have SAP Master Data Governance EAM extension by Utopia, And then we also have the SAP Extended ECM by OpenText, an add-on for capital project and operations. So these are two of our solution extensions that SAP is very proud of and very proud of our partners for. And I know that both Utopia and OpenText are very proud of as well. And so there's value in these. And to talk more about that value, I'd like to now hand it over to Sam Conway from Forrester, and he'll introduce himself and give us some information about that. Sam, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. All right, so as stated earlier, my name is Sam Conway. I'm a senior consultant on the TEI team at Forrester. And in this role, I work with technology vendors to find, quantify, and articulate the business value of their solutions or services. Prior to working at Forrester, I've worked in various consulting and research roles, both on the primary research side as well as on the strategic planning and forecasting side. Before I start my portion of the presentation, I just want to make a few disclosures. So the audience should be aware that this document is an abridged version of the full case study titled The Total Economic Impact of SAP Solution Extensions for Asset-Intensive Industries, which was completed in May 2020. The study is commissioned by SAP and delivered by the Forrester Consulting Group. Forrester makes no assumptions as to the potential return on investment that other organizations will receive, and Forrester strongly advises that readers should use their own estimates within the framework provided in the report to determine the appropriateness of an investment in SAP solution extensions. SAP reviewed and provided feedback to Forrester, but Forrester maintains editorial control over the study and its findings and does not accept changes to the study that contradict Forrester's findings or obscure the meaning of the study. The customer names for interviews were provided by SAP, and finally, Forrester does not endorse SAP. And one quick item before getting into the methodology and the findings, but I just wanted to poll the audience quickly just to see what your level of experience was with building ROI business cases internally for your firm's investments. So I'll give everyone 30 seconds here to enter their level of experience, and then we'll review. You got about 5 seconds left, and then I'm going to flip over. All right. So we got a good spread today. It's nice to see people in those middle two. I think this is going to be very useful to everyone, but just wanted to let everyone know, and also for those that are not very experienced, this is going to be a good learning experience for you because we're going to cover some methodology that you can use internally to help yourself build business cases. So that takes us to what is TEI, and I'm going to go over the methodology that Forrester has developed on the total economic impact team to evaluate investments in services and solutions. So TEI goes beyond your traditional TCO and ROI business models, which would traditionally look either at just the costs and cost savings of an IT solution, or the end results, looking at the user efficiencies, business effectiveness, new revenue, what the outcomes were for your business. We try to look at both the costs and the benefits. We also weight these based on risk and uncertainty. So we try to look at variables that might hinder or accentuate the scalability and flexibility of tools and services, as well as different elements that might make the stated experiences within the case study different for those who are reading. And what this does is it helps us create a conservative return estimate and realistic business case framework for the majority of readers. In order to do that, we focus on 4 key components. So first and most importantly, we look at the business benefits. These are the advantages and outcomes that organizations gain by implementing solution or service. And then we weight these against costs. So we look at both direct costs, such as fees paid for a service or solution, but also indirect costs. So internal costs, such as training and implementation, things that don't have an explicit paid dollar value, but are things you need to incur in order to gain those ultimate benefits. When possible, we also try to measure what we call flexibility. So this is not explicitly what customers are currently experiencing, but the possibilities they unlock in the future by making an investment today. Way to think about it is not essentially what has happened, but what can happen now that they have that, but they could not otherwise attain unless they made this investment. And finally, we risk adjust all these categories. And again, that's to create a conservative and realistic view of what a potential customer may experience. We're looking at elements that may impact an organization's ability to recognize benefits, as well as those that may inflate or elongate implementation periods. And altogether, these elements make up what we call the total economic impact. In the case of evaluating SAP solution extensions for asset-intensive industries, Forrester took a multi-step approach. So first, we did due diligence, and that's both internal and external. We harnessed the knowledge of Forrester's analysts and research to understand the product market, as well as interviewing key stakeholders at SAP in order to understand the broader product strategy, vision, do a real deep dive into what the product does and what it provides for customers. The bulk of our data gathering, though, is done through customer interviews. So we interviewed 4 organizations that had these solutions deployed in order to learn about their use cases and understand why they chose them and the benefits and costs that they experienced. After gathering this information, we create what we call a composite organization. This represents the typical or average experience amongst those 4 customers and really tries to bring it back to a singular view that readers can then empathize with. And we create a financial model for that composite organization, again, based on the customer's deployments and experiences. Finally, we write a case study about that deployment, explaining how we built out those assumptions, along with the stories from the customers, their statements on what they've experienced, what they like about the products, why they chose them. Really get a full understanding of their customer journey. So before we dig into the individual benefit results, I'd like to cover some of the high-level findings from the study. So this is the high-level 3-year impact of the solutions. So ultimately, we found for this composite organization a return on investment of 281%, a net present value of $13 million, and a payback period of 7 months. And I should note that when calculating ROI, NPV, and payback, we use a 10% discount rate to calculate present value. And now we'll dig into who the customers were and why these chose these solutions, how we built out that composite organization, and ultimately how we calculated these benefits. So we interviewed 4 different customers who had deployed either the ECM or MDG solution extensions. There was a Canadian oil and gas firm operating an oil refinery producing 80,000 barrels a day, a U.S. oil and gas firm with 500 employees and 2 liquefaction trains, a U.K. public utilities firm providing 1.4 billion liters of water per day to over 5 million customers, and a U.S. municipality providing essential services to over 1 million residents. And so you'll notice that the geographies on these organizations vary, as well as their industries and what they're ultimately producing. But there were a lot of shared common experiences, pain points, and goals that they had that ultimately led to this investment. So when we were looking at the key drivers for investment and speaking to the customers about this, we found that for almost all of them, information was very disorganized. It was scattered across multiple solutions. They were using maybe rivaling services or legacy solutions that just were not purpose-built for enterprise-level data management. This was driving up costs, causing a lot of confusion, and ultimately it was a roadblock to them gaining business efficiencies. So they really required a more efficient way to manage both their data as well as ongoing capital projects and ongoing manage and maintenance of their facilities. When evaluating solutions, the organizations look to replace the disparate legacy systems for categorizing and locating data with a centralized, easy-to-use solution. And they also wanted to provide the right people with the right information at the right time. So the feet on the ground needed to be able to get the information they needed when they needed it in order to complete tasks in a timely manner and in a correct manner. And there were also those that had large capital projects ongoing, and they wanted to keep those projects on track and avoid missing deadlines that would ultimately cost them not just in the near term for delay costs, but also pushes out any revenue generation that these facilities might do in the future for every day of delay. Ultimately, the organizations were able to replace their legacy solutions with modern centralized solutions. And through this, they improved efficiency and reduced delays at facilities. They were also able to keep projects on track and avoid missing deadlines, and implement cost controls and manage data with fewer resources. We have a couple of statements from customers about what they really liked in these products, or just the ultimate benefits that they received. So this was a document controller, the Canadian oil and gas firm. And they said, on the engineering information management side, we were looking for workflows, life cycles, and searchability. You need to have a system with the ability to support these processes. On the non-functional side, we were looking at vendor quality, and that's a big one for OpenText, which is the partner that SAP was working with on the solution. And really what this speaks to is just, again, needing to have these capabilities at an enterprise level from a quality vendor, and that slides right into your ongoing workflows. And that's why they chose this solution. And then we also interviewed Enterprise Data and Information Architecture Manager at the Public Utilities firm. And they stated, Utopia helps us through MDG to redesign our data hierarchy to an ISO standard. Utopia helped us do that migration and also helps us design hierarchies and then do all the work to fill in our gaps in data. This is full cycle from planning to consolidate to creating to classifying. And this really speaks to, again, that disparate data across multiple sources or sites. We're going to dig into that and the benefits, but again, with this organization, just anecdotally, they said that, from site to site on that ISO standard, they would have employees entering different parts with different spelling, or I'm sorry, the same parts with different spelling, which again, kind of hindered their ability to take inventory on what they actually had on site. Something as small as that could really hinder that. And so they needed to just have a uniform standard across their entire enterprise, and that's why they chose this solution. So again, going back to that multi-step process, we create a composite organization. So because these organizations are a different size, different location, different industry, we have to create one uniform view. So for the composite organization that we've developed, it has the following characteristics. $2 billion annual revenue, 1,000 employees. They have SAP S/4HANA already deployed before deploying these solution extensions. And they have 500 employees directly tied to projects, operations, and maintenance of their plants. So these are the 5 benefits that customers were able to quantify, and these all add up to that NPV and ROI high-level findings. But looking at them on an individualized basis, first we have improved operations and maintenance efficiency with an $8.4 million present value, reduction in maintenance inventory costs, $4.7 million in present value, capital project handover efficiency with a present value of $2.2 million, retirement of legacy ECM and MDM solutions with a value of $1.8 million, and then data management efficiency valued at $585,000. Again, present values are all 10% discount rate over the 3-year period. So the first benefit we quantified was the improved operations and maintenance efficiency. And before using SAP solution extensions for asset-intensive industries, organizations struggled with low visibility due to disconnected data. After using the SAP asset extensions for asset-intensive industries, the organizations could conduct a wide range of structured and unstructured content and integrate it with their existing SAP deployment. Because they had very disconnected data before, when workers would go on site or start a job, they would spend a significant amount of time searching for documentation, work history, or other information. And this was often a manual process, sometimes a paper-based process. And being able to find that correct information quickly, the employees recognized the annual time savings of 10%. So about 10% of the actual time that they were spending on maintenance or operations was just related to finding the information required to do those tasks. When modeling this benefit for the composite organization, Forrester assumes the team size of 500 users and an average fully burdened salary of $75,000. When we risk adjust this by 10%, this benefit is valued again at $8.4 million over 3 years for the composite organization. The second benefit is the reduction in maintenance inventory costs. So before using SAP solution extensions, these organizations lacked the information they needed to make enterprise-level decisions on maintenance, procurement, and inventory. As I stated before, often this data was in disparate systems, sometimes different tools, sometimes different geographies or sites had different data repositories. But they didn't have a unified enterprise-level view. They were often not following the same standards, which again led to an incomplete view of existing maintenance inventory. They also weren't able to see things like who they bought that inventory from. So they weren't able to tell which major distributors they did the most business with, et cetera, from an enterprise level. After using the solution extensions, the organizations could consolidate and standardize their granular asset data and integrate that capability with SAP. So it was easier for them to determine which parts were needed and which parts could be refurbished. It also told them where the parts were. So if they needed to replace a part, they might now know that they had that part on site instead of reaching out to a faraway site and incurring a high cost of transportation. Also, by knowing which vendors they're doing the majority of business with for several parts, they could negotiate bulk deals with those vendors. So by eliminating duplicative purchases and facilitating bulk order discounts, we found that an organization had an annual reduction in maintenance inventory costs of 5%. So for the composite organization, we've assumed a maintenance inventory budget of $40 million. So by reducing this by 5%, with a risk adjustment of 5%, the 3-year value of this benefit is $4.7 million. We also found with firms that were doing large capital projects, significant capital project handover efficiency. So before using the SAP solution extensions, the organizations had to start new capital intensive projects by exchanging massive amounts of unstructured documentation between multiple parties. You would have the operators who were commissioning the construction firms, and then the engineering firms. And there would be large amounts of unstructured data going between the 3 firms. We had an anecdotal quote from one organization, one document controller, who was saying they were getting upwards of 1 million emails dumped on them during these phases. So it was near impossible for a person to intelligently process that vast amount of information. So, long transmittal times with high volumes of data really slowed things down because it was very difficult for teams to process, and they risk losing information. When you're doing large amounts of unstructured data in a very manual process, things fall through the cracks, and that has a cost. If there's a miscommunication between any of those parties, things could be constructed incorrectly, deadlines can be missed, and you start racking up very high delay costs. We found that after using SAP solution extensions, the organizations were able to standardize into a single platform. So they also eliminated other tools that were maybe being pushed on them from outside parties. This helped reduce transmittal times. It sped up review cycles, and it reduced the overall number of employees that they needed to do this manual document review process. It also helped them avoid delays. Not only by speeding up review, but by ensuring that people had the correct information, things were built to the correct specifications. There was less back and forth between the three parties, and also reduce any rework that might have had to been done. When modeling this benefit for the composite organization, we've assumed that the composite organization required 30 full-time resources for document review before having the ECM solution. These full-time resources had an average fully burdened salary of $100,000 a year. These resources were able to reduce their document review time by 25% with the ECM solution extension. And the firm's also able to avoid 2 days of delay in a given year of this capital project, with a cost per day of delay valued at $1.5 million. With an attribution of 10% to the ECM solution and a risk adjustment of 15%, the 3-year present value of this benefit is $2.2 million. We also found that firms were able to retire their legacy systems, both on the MDM side and the ECM side. So again, before using the SAP solution extensions, organizations relied on inefficient legacy systems, both for MDM and ECM. Not only did these solutions not meet their needs, they required further investment in management, operation, and maintenance. And the less suitable they were for enterprise level ECM or MDM, the more customization, maintenance, and other work they required from the firms. After deploying SAP solution extensions, organizations were able to retire their legacy solutions, which helped them both eliminate spend on support hardware and software licenses, but also allowed them to redeploy support staff that were supporting those applications. For the composite organization, Forrester assumes an annual legacy savings of $350,000 related to ECM hardware and software spend. Forrester also assumes annual hardware and upgrade savings of $200,000 supporting MDM solutions for the composite organization. 2 ECM full-time resources are redeployed, and they were employed at an average annual rate of $120,000. When risk adjusted by 10%, this benefit has a 3-year present value of $1.8 million. Our final quantified benefit is data management efficiency. So before using SAP solution extensions, organizations had to use disparate, difficult to use tools for data governance. As mentioned before, these were either bespoke systems that were customized but not purpose-built for this enterprise-level usage, or they were tools really not designed at all for enterprise-level data management, like spreadsheets. Some larger organizations had different tools spread across different sites, departments, or divisions, which further siloed information and data, and again, hindered their ability to get an enterprise-level view of their assets. When using SAP's Master Data Management Solution Extension, organizations have one set of easily used tools built for their future strategy. So not only is it built for your current state of data management, but it's built with the flexibility for your organization to take on some of these next level data management endeavors, like as stated earlier, asset lifecycle management, and intelligent forecasting of failure amongst parts and other things like that. So we also heard that not only was managing master data easier with tools that were purpose-built for this, so it kind of reduced the effort for MDM employees to do their current roles, but this also had automation features not included in their old legacy solutions, which further reduced the manual effort required for data management. When modeling this benefit for the composite organization, we've assumed that it has an existing team of 10 full-time resources performing master data management, and they are at an annual rate of $75,000. The firm is able to redeploy a third of this team due to the new tools built for this workflow, but also the automation capabilities. So over a 3-year model, when risk adjusted by 5%, this represents a value of $585,000. So we also found benefits that couldn't be quantified for this study. So they were either very nascent, things that they had started to recognize, or there just wasn't enough data readily available to include them in the financial model. But these are benefits that they spoke to. So there was the reduced risk of a safety incident. Having the right information in the hands of individuals so that they complete their job reduces the likelihood that they'll commit an error and be involved in some sort of safety incident, but also, being able to do proactive maintenance on facilities ensures that they don't break down and cause a safety risk. And also just having a full view across your assets to understand, where they are, really helps you, ensure that things stay in working order and don't cause some sort of failure that might lead to an injury. Along those lines, there's also the avoidance of penalties, legal costs, and reputational damage. So if you're a large utility firm and you have a critical failure at a remote site, that can cause environmental damage or damage others' property, which would then, come to you in penalties from the government, legal costs with those whose property is damaged, but also ultimately hurt your firm's reputation. There's also an increase in first-time fix rate and reduction of asset downtime and rework. So this is twofold. This is both on the side where the operations staff have the right information in their hands at the right time, but also having that robust enterprise-level view of all of your assets helps you understand where they are in their life cycle, exactly what parts are in each asset, the life cycle of those parts. It really allows you to do a deep dive into all the data related to those assets so that you can project, when you need to do preventative maintenance in the future. And then there's the improved knowledge transfer and reduction in training time. So we did hear from a number of organizations that, they are operating in industries with aging workforces who have historically done things in a very manual, paper-based, siloed manner. And many of those individuals, when they retire, take that knowledge with them or have left it in a state that is only something they can understand. It's not easy to pass on to a new employee. So having all of this information readily available digitally helps organizations capture, things like the history of maintenance on an asset and pass that on to the future generation of workers in a faster manner than they would have been able to in the past. So not only does it ensure that all of that knowledge is passed on to the next generation of employees, but it also helps the ramp up time of those new employees when they're brought on board. So we found that customers incurred three categories of cost. We had SAP fees, internal labor costs, and training costs. And the costs that are listed here, the numbers are for the composite organization included in the financial model. So their SAP fees paid for the initial deployment, licensing, and ongoing maintenance of the solution extensions. The composite organization pays $207,000 per year for the use of these extensions after its initial deployment. Internal labor costs are the time and resources spent internally transitioning from the legacy solutions and integrated data sources to the solution extensions. So for the composite organization, included in this are 5 FTEs spending 50% of their time during the initial deployment, and then they spend 38% of their time in the ongoing years 1 through 3 of the model on the management and maintenance of the solutions. The salaries for the internal labor range from $75,000 for document controllers to $120,000 for the support staff on the technical side. And finally, we have training costs. This is the time spent training employees on the new solutions. Forrester modeled 600 users trained initially with 30 additional employees trained each year to account for turnover in the composite organization. And there's an average of 8 hours of training for an employee to be proficient, modeled at an internal rate of $50 per hour. But we should note that, while that 8 hours is an average, there are individuals such as those on the ground doing maintenance who are up and running, in a matter of an hour or two, being proficient to those, on the back end doing a bit more technical work on the solutions who had a slightly higher training period. So TEI analysis also includes flexibility and risk factors. So again, flexibility is those things that organizations can do. It might not necessarily be what they are doing, but it's those future benefits that they have access to. So we found that organizations were starting to work on creating dynamic risk models to manage assets and plan future projects. And they can also combine these solution extensions to multiply the scale of benefits achieved. Then we look at 2 different kinds of risk factors. So impact risks are factors that may reduce the stated benefits that an organization may experience. So across these different benefits, the risk factors that we looked at were the size and scope of operations and workforce, benchmark productivity and content management processes, complexity of operations, existing software and hardware costs, unforeseen natural events such as weather, and individual organizations' ability to negotiate with vendors. The second risk we look at is implementation risk, and these are the factors that may cause the cost for an organization to differ from those in the case study. So again, when looking across those different costs, the factors that we looked at were the number of users, the number of data objects, specific use case customization, internal talent, and finally, the complexity of usage and required time to become proficient in specific roles. So once again, after going over what the specific components of benefits and costs there were and what those were valued at, I just want to bring it back to that high-level 3-year model result. So when looking at those 5 quantified benefits versus the 3 cost categories, we had an ROI of 281%, a net present value of $13 million, and a payback period of 7 months for the composite organization. And again, that's at a 10% discount rate for present value. So with that, I'd like to hand things back to Tom, and I think we're going to get into some questions and answers.
Absolutely. Sam, thank you so much for this information. Very informative, very comprehensive. I just want to remind our listeners, if you do have questions and have not had a chance to submit them yet, please feel free to do that in the Q&A panel. I do see a few questions there, Sam, so if you want to start to take a look at some of those, and I'll come back to you here in a moment. But as we continue, I wanted to ask one question to the team, and unlike the previous poll that we did, this one is not for public consumption. It was just a question that we wanted to make sure if folks, any of the attendees that are on the call here today in North America, if you would like to schedule a meeting with SAP more about this topic, either about the larger intelligent asset management portfolio and some of what our customers are doing there, or about specifically about some of these solution extensions, please feel free to indicate that here. Again, we're not going to publish this, the number of people that are saying yes or no. It's simply if folks would find benefit of that, and we'll take that information offline and follow up with folks. And as Sam mentioned, we would like to take some time for some question and answer here. So Sam, if you had a moment, I see at least a couple questions that might be most applicable for you to answer. If you want to take a moment to look at those and provide at least some initial answers.
Sure. So I see a question here. Where does Forrester source its assumptions for the model? So when we're building the composite organization, obviously we're basing this on the customer interviews. So we try to find, sometimes we get the same answer from everyone. That's the best case scenario. And sometimes, we have to look at the various factors that may influence benefits that we heard from customers, and try to find a nice middle ground. Sometimes there are assumptions we need to build in that are not, are from outside the study. And when we do that, we try to look at, industry standards. So when we look at things like salary, right, we try to, some of these are published by the government, or there are other, sites out there that have kind of like average salaries for different positions. We also have analysts at Forrester who are subject matter experts, either in industries or in specific technology fields, and we'll use their knowledge to come up with a best fit assumption for the model. So we try to look at all different data sources to source those assumptions. I see another question here. Did all 4 clients use both OpenText and Utopia? So it was a mix. There was 2 organizations that were using the ECM solution, and there were 2 organizations using the MDG solution. There was 1 organization that was using both solutions, but when we spoke with them, we spoke about one of the solutions. Really what we did was we isolated we spoke with organizations about those specific solutions to try to isolate the benefits that one would get from that solution. So while we do recognize that there are obvious synergies for things like maintenance efficiency, where you could use data from MDG coupled with the ECM solution, providing it to those people on the ground, we really wanted to understand in a vacuum, what those benefits were, because when it's a synergy, it's only going to be more. But to be able to isolate and speak to that individual benefit. So, long answer short, it's 2 and 2 on the OpenText Utopia.
Got it, Sam. If it's okay, can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So. Understood on the breakout of the individual solutions. Do you have, we've talked a lot about just the different parts of the business, your benefits, talked about maintenance benefits, inventory level benefits, and so forth. Do you have did you talk, for these interviews, obviously you talked to companies of different profiles, did you talk to roles or personas at different profiles? In other words, were you talking to maintenance planners, reliability engineers? Do you know at that level, or was it at a higher level than that?
Yeah, so we spoke to, so there was an individual, so when we spoke to the public utilities firm, it was the enterprise data and information architecture manager. So it was the individual kind of responsible for, deploying and overseeing, their future asset data vision. So he, from a high level, was overseeing all of that. We spoke with a document controller for an oil and gas firm. So again, they're more in that ECM space. Looking at all that. We did speak with some technical side individual as well. So there was one individual actually at that same oil and gas firm. We did speak with the document controller, but we also spoke with the kind of the architecture manager for ECM. So it was the person doing all the technical implementation side of things. And then we spoke with an individual who was overseeing the MDG deployment. I guess their title was EAM manager at a municipality. So this was a U.S. city where basically they were, again, overseeing the deployment of that EAM solution, its usage amongst different departments. But really they were kind of the facilitator of these, improvements for various departments across the city.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I see some other questions too, if you want to address some of those.
Yes. Okay, so there's two questions here that are kind of the same theme. So one individual asking, in addition to ROI, what are some of the other good ways to convince my leadership that we need this solution? So I think that you really want to look at the pain points that you have and look at the customer journey. What are the problems that you're trying to solve? And the ROI, I think, is a good kind of pushing thing to push someone over the line, right? It's kind of putting the proof in the pudding. But the stories for these individuals around the larger vision issues that they're trying to solve, right? Like having being able to do lifecycle management of assets, moving into kind of the future of master data management. I think, reducing safety incidents, things that might not have like an explicit dollar value, but might be issues within your organization. You can look at those non-quantified benefits, but also ultimately point back to, the ROI that's there for firms that have deployed this. And then there's two questions here. So my company is a different size than the one you discussed. How can I apply these learnings to my company? And another that says, how can I use the case study to determine what costs and benefits and ROI might be for my company? So I think these two are very similar. So the case study itself, which I recommend everyone go read, it has financial tables in it that are very straightforward, and organizations can kind of plug in their own variables there. We're also currently working with SAP on a interactive ROI tool. So in the not too distant future, there will be a web-based tool that readers can go to and plug in their own information. And based on the findings of the study, it will give them a customized view of ROI for these two solutions. So, first there's the study, right, where you can go and read and look at the different benefits and try to, associate those with variables from your company or organization. But then there also will be that interactive web tool.
So, Sam, it's interesting on that one, just jumping in here for a moment as well. I think that's really consistent with a lot of what we've seen within SAP with a lot of our customers in the asset management space. So when you look at these asset-intensive industries, whether it be manufacturing, chemicals, utilities, oil and gas, a lot of the consistency we see is really in two main areas. I want to, and it comes back to the ROI points you're making. I want to either optimize and, as a result, manage my costs more effectively, drive down my maintenance costs or what have you. Or it might be the other side of the business case coin, where you say, I want to drive the top line. I want to drive more revenue opportunities. And one way to do that might be to introduce new business models that I can manage more effectively because of the way I manage my assets and the corresponding data. So it's good to see that what you're finding from a total economic impact perspective is consistent with what we're seeing on the customers that we're talking to.
So I'll ask you this one, Tom. Was there anything that surprised you in the study? Obviously, I know I have an answer here when talking to customers, but I'm curious if there was anything that was surprising to you about the results of the study.
I would say maybe a little bit that I would have expected I forget how you worded it, but the summary of the data, the impacts to the data management side of it. So you went through the 5 pieces, and the last one with about $500K in expectations. I've seen actually more benefit than that as well. Not quantified at obviously the formal level that you have here, but that one surprised me a little bit. I would have expected that to be a little higher, but the one that did not surprise me at all was the first one around operations and maintenance. And if you go back to the first slide that we looked at, that's one of the categories we refer to. We talk about the world of asset operations and maintenance and how legacy or how long-term that's been there in a legacy fashion, and how the ability to add some of these other pieces help it. So yeah, I would say maybe a little bit of a surprise there, but I wouldn't say, but the fact that there was a benefit did not surprise me. How about
Great.
you? And same question then in terms of some of you've done a lot of these for different solution extensions or different topics. Did anything about this area of asset management surprise you or cause you to have more questions down the road?
Yeah, I get the benefit of, interviewing hundreds of people a year about different solutions and how they use them. And I find that I learn something new every month from individuals. But I always like to kind of hone in on interesting use cases and interesting anecdotes. And I just found really interesting here, the public utility firm in the UK, they told me about how essentially their future vision is to do these projections of failure rates, right? If they had, like, let's say 5 pumps going, they could essentially now with this data model out, okay, what if one of those pumps failed? Could we let one fail and the other 4 would be able to cover, the volume of it, and how much lead time does that give us in being able to perform maintenance on this? So I found that some of that future vision asset management to be very interesting, where you have the super granular view of all the parts within any of these assets, and now you can kind of create benchmarks and track the life of those parts, when you expect them to need to be replaced or fixed. I found that side of it very interesting.
That's great to hear, and I think that really is the meeting or the merger of the business process world with the economic impact, which you've done a great job in for your colleagues at Forrester in driving that home here in the call today. And with that, I am looking at the time, and while I absolutely would love to continue talking about this and both the business benefits and corresponding economic value of some of these solution extensions and asset-intensive industries, we are unfortunately at our end of time. But Sam, thank you so much for all the work that you and the team at Forrester have done. Thank you for sharing some of the results of that work here. And that'll be all for our session today. Good luck to everyone. Continue to stay safe. And until next time, bye-bye.